Welcome to the latest episode of 305 Vox Populi. I'm Mayor Manny Cid. And with us today, we have the one and only Michael Coote. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Appreciate you coming on. It's an honor for you to come on, right? So your history is really phenomenal. I don't think your story has been told, right? I'll share this with you. One time I heard you speak and you shared a story about the jungles in South and Central America, and I was blown away. I was like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that about Michael Coote. I mean, so I can only imagine that is beyond the tip. That's the tip of the iceberg in terms of what your story is. So you served this country incredibly honorably. You put it all on the line for this country. So what was your why? When did you decide to sign up for the military? And when was that day that you said, you know what, this is going to be my future?
Great question. Again, thank you for having me. I wish I could say unequivocally that it was, to serve my country, and my intentions were noble from the very beginning. But to be fair, after high school, I really wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And my father had insisted. I knew I was going to go to college, but I said, but I really don't know, what I'm going to study. I had heard something about marine biology, and I thought, that'd be, out on the boat studying the fish. That'd be neat. And my father said, absolutely not. You're going to go to school and you're going to be a business major. You're going to study business. And I said, well, that really has no interest for me at all. He said, well, that's fine, but that'd be the gateway to a lot of other professions. Go get a business degree. I said, yeah, but Dad, he said, it doesn't matter. I said, well, I'm paying for school. I had taken out student loans. He said, well, it doesn't matter. You're paying for it to get a business degree. I said, oh, okay, Dad. So I went to school for a couple of years, and I just really wasn't invested in it. I was an average student. In high school, I'd been a good student, but I put very little effort into it. So, B's and C's, occasional A, but I said, boy, this seems like such a waste of my time. So I went and did an internship. I was living up in the Northeast. I did an internship in Boston with the idea being, I was going to learn the business. And so I took 2 years of school and a year of an internship. And I said, you know what? This is just not doing it for me. And I'd been an athletic guy, good athlete in high school, and I felt myself kind of slipping away. I'd gotten away from it. So I challenged myself. At that time, you could run in the Boston Marathon without having an official number. They had the back of the pack crowd. So I made up my mind I was going to do the Boston Marathon, and I hadn't done any training, and I had a pair of Converse high toppers. But I said, you know what? I think it's just, it's your will. It's if you want to do it, you'll make it. So I did it. I made it. It wasn't spectacular. I think 4.5 hours it took me. And I lost all of my toenails except for one. And but then that kind of convinced me that, if you put your mind to it, you can do it. And if you're not happy, with this college, then, why not do something else? And I thought, but what am I going to do? So that was the impetus then to join the military. I said, you know what, I can go and challenge myself. I'd heard somebody knew a guy that had been to jungle school. And he said, yeah, this guy can go in the jungle. He could live there, for a year, just living off the land. He knows how to make snares and traps. And I said, oh, wow, that's kind of cool, And I think Rambo or First Blood had come out around that time. So I said, oh boy, that sounds kind of neat. So with Sylvester Stallone. So I said, I'm going to join the military, and give me time to kind of figure out what I want to do. At the same time as I can give back to my country. So that was a thought. I said, I'll serve my country, but at the same time, it's a journey of self-discovery. So I went in, and that was kind of, that's what started it. I don't want to get too carried away, but yeah.
Got it. So why Special Forces, right? So I think you touched upon a little bit there, right? Talking about the jungle. But when did that switch? Because I have a lot of friends that have gone into the military, and a lot of folks, they pick the different branches and they stick with a specific job. But when did you make that switch from, hey, I'm going to go to the military, I'm going to do it while I figure things out? But figure things out, you said, what, Special Forces is where it's at for me. And if you can define for us what Special Forces in your particular situation, what is that? What was that definition? What that underlying definition, right? Because there's a lot of different Special Forces, but what was the specific?
Okay, sure.
Label of Special Forces. Whatever you can disclose.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sure you can.
yeah. No, that's fine. So I went in for a 3-year tour. And so I said, I'm going to go in for 3 years. That way, and I went in, I think I was a few months shy of 21. So I said, I'll go in 21, I'll come out 24, 25, and then I can kind of get on with my life after I figure out what I want to do, challenge myself, and then that will give me some time to reflect. So I went in and I signed up for unassigned airborne. So I went to infantry basic training in the Army, and then I went to airborne school, and I had heard about airborne school, very difficult, and it was not difficult at all, quite frankly, and not because one is athletic or not athletic. It's the idea is to get you through it and teach you how to fall out of a plane without hurting yourself. So that's airborne school. So I went through that. And I said, wow, I really was kind of wanted to be challenged. But so after airborne school, they sent me to a Ranger unit. And very early on, within a few months, 3-4 months of getting there, they sent me to Ranger school, which was very difficult. It's more of a leadership school. What they'll typically do is 12-man group, you're doing something, everybody has to kind of know the plan, and then out of the blue, they'll tell the person in charge, you've just been killed, and then they'll pick somebody, all right, you're in charge. And now you're just back there kind of, just marching along thinking, oh boy, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm wet, man, I can't wait for this to get over. Now you're in charge. You're like, what? What do you mean I'm in charge? So that that was challenging, but it was a good leadership school. So I made it through that, and then there's a competition called the Best Ranger competition where they get special operations folks. I think open it up now, and it's a competition, 3 days, running, shooting, jumping, etc. And so I had the occasion to do that, and kind of got to compare myself to other people that were coming from different units, and it's a 2-man competition. You're in a buddy team, and we did quite well. And I said, okay. So I kind of held these guys. I don't know if I could do that, but I said, well, I'm only here for 3 years, so let's get the most out of it. And that was what prompted me to go to Special Forces. So after 3 years, and my time was up, and I said, I really want to go to Special Forces. And they said, you can sign up for all different lengths. I said, three more years. 3 years, I'm going to go and see if I like it, and then I'm done. Then I'll go back and I'll start doing whatever it was that I was supposed to, do. Back to business school, I would tell my father. So that's what prompted me to go to Special Forces, and it really was. It was probably, life-changing. Obviously, I went in with the intent of 3 years, and then I signed up for another 3 years, and before it was all said and done, I got out with 35 years and a couple of months. So it took me a long time to decide what I wanted to do with my life, I guess.
That's amazing. Yeah. So, did you go from Army Ranger to on the Special Forces side? Was it Green Beret, or was it, or what? Where exactly did that next step lead you in that career, right? Because you went from, or was it always? Because I mean I don't know, and I think a lot of folks that are watching don't know the hierarchy or the different. Because when you think of the military, it's a lot of people are like, oh, just the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, but there's Special Forces under every single one of them.
Correct.
Right?
That's true.
And so where did that lead you to?
So I went from the Army Ranger side to Army Special Forces, aka Green Beret. We don't typically refer to ourselves as Green Berets. I mean, we wear a Green Beret, but that's typically if we're talking to other people, we're not saying, oh, you were in the Green Berets, what unit? We would say, oh, I was in, they're groups, they're aligned by groups. So typically regular Army has brigades and regiments, which are the larger size element. We go by groups, which are like the SEAL teams. They have SEAL team, the different 2, 3, 6 we have groups, and our group was, there's 5 groups, 5 active duty groups. And so I was in 7th group, which was geographically aligned. At that time, what differentiated special forces was we had language training, which a lot of the other special operations forces don't have. They were more direct action, whereas we had a dual role where we were trained in direct action, where we could go with our team and do things. But we also had a what's called foreign internal defense, where we would teach other militaries or security forces how to do things so that they could do it themselves, which, of course, that's probably one of the lessons learned here, is that we cannot want it more than they do. So if we go in there and try to, we saw that in Afghanistan, unfortunately, most recently, where as soon as we left, everything crumbled within, a matter of days, and we were the only thing holding it up. And the idea was, of course, that we would train them and they would take it over. So I learned that on a smaller scale along the way, that we cannot want it more than they do. And if we're doing it for them, telling them, and kind of always stepping in, no, get like almost like a dad. No, get out of the way, son. Let me do this for you. I think you're not creating an enduring capacity, and what happened then is going to happen. So we would train people how to do it themselves, let them invest in the process, and we could actually leave. And when we left, they would do a great job in our absence.
So Army Special Forces, Unit 7. Am I saying it correct?
7th group.
7th group.
Yep.
All right. How many languages did you?
Yeah, we because we were Central and South America, so we only Spanish and Portuguese.
So you speak 3 languages.
Well, I do. Well, although my Portuguese now é muito bem.
Bom dia.
Yeah, bom dia. I realized I did great in the school with the Spanish when I finished the Special Forces training and was awarded my Green Beret. They sent me overseas, my first assignment, which is unusual. Typically, they keep you stateside and then you make trips overseas, but they sent me overseas, much to the chagrin of a lot of the people that when I got to my first team, they said, "Oh, okay, where else have you been?" And I said, "Oh, I just got out of school." And they're like, "Oh my God, we have this cherry here that, and they said, "Okay, what's your rating in Spanish?" I said, "Oh, I don't speak Spanish." They're like, "What? What are they sending it?" So our very first trip, they sent us to one of the South American countries during the early days of the drug wars, and we were in a 2-man team responsible for teaching folks 200 to 300 person camp. So we took over the function of putting the camp together, the lodging, the logistics, the training, and then they would go out on patrol, and we served as advisors. And you can imagine that first trip where I didn't speak any Spanish at all, and I'm trying to teach these guys. So I used, little plastic soldiers. I learned a few words for, ambush, explode, shoot. And then the young guys, because I was, in my 20s, the young troops I was teaching taught me every single bad curse word in Spanish you could for, so
in every country in South America has different, and Central America.
So I learned that, like, oh no, they would tell me, oh, this is how you say, whatever, and
he doesn't want to repeat it.
And so I would think I'd be saying something innocuous, and I'd say, oh, and I'd say the word, and everybody would laugh at my expense, But yeah, it was a good experience, and obviously, if you're going to learn the language, being thrown into it like that is probably the best way you can do it. So, with time, that trip was horrible. We got a lot done, but in the next trip, so little by little, it kept getting better.
All right, we're taking a quick pause to thank our sponsors. We're taking a quick pause to thank our sponsors. Miami Lakes Automall, shout out to Fred, he gave the seed money. To start this, 16600 Northwest 57th Avenue. They're located at 305-455-3510. Mike, have you been in here since you've seen? Have you seen this mural before?
I haven't. I had noticed it earlier and commented. I said, "Wow, that's really amazing. Who did that?"
So Grisel Gajano, she's a school counselor during the day, and then at night she's an amazing artist. Shout out to Grisel. You can call her at 76353-8608. And our food sponsor today, Sosa Flow. Thanks. Thank you to Joseph. Costco Pizza, right? I think his fire. And then Enrique Santos, appreciate you, appreciate Harold, appreciate the entire team, Julio, everybody. They donated the Roadcaster. Make sure you tune into the show, one of the highly rated shows in all the United States. Enrique's a good man. And our film production team, what's really cool today, I know the students were at school, they were working on some tests, but Albert and Brent run a broadcast academy, right, where they have 120 students. They're the teachers. They teach kids these skills. So now they get to hear your story. You're gonna have 120 students listening to your story and working on editing your story, and then they upload it to YouTube and all the different platforms next Wednesday. But what they do that's pretty cool. They're the envy of a lot of schools now because they have like an ESPN style. I think they do baseball too and everything. They go film baseball games with they have their own anchors and it's interesting what they do. And it's all part of kids becoming better and learning skills that'll help them in the future. So one thing I realized, Mike, is that combat veterans are so special in terms of how humble and how sometimes they internalize. You all internalize stuff. And I'll give you an example. Jaime Gutierrez, who we had on the podcast a while back, everybody knows him today as a director of small short films. Did a great documentary that won national awards recently on basketball stuff. Producer for ESPN, now runs all the basketball in Central South America and Canada. I mean, in the Caribbean, amazing guy. He went to Barbara Goldman, but he never shared with anybody, or he's never shared his story of how he was one of the first members of the U.S. military in Afghanistan. How he didn't shower for 3 months and how that still has impacted his skin today. How he unfortunately saw friends of his pass away right next to him. He didn't know if it was going to be his last day or not, but he goes, Manny, I just don't talk about it. You know what I mean? I served my country. I love my country, but it's not, I don't wear it on my sleeve. Like, I don't walk around telling people, and I was like taken aback by it. And I know I talked to you briefly about it. I was like, man, that's how humbling is it to meet folks who go out there, who face evil, right? A lot of times you're facing folks who are willing to do bad things. Yet when you come here, you're super humble, go back into civilian life. And if we don't start having, if I don't ask some questions, you'll never tell. You know what I mean? It's not like you would tell. And I remember going back to one of the times that I heard you speak, and when you shared one story reluctantly, right? You even told me, it goes, Manny, I don't really, but you shared that story about, never forget, you were in the jungle and your unit ran into a small boy. The kid took off running. You guys ran after him because you didn't know where he was going or who he was going to alert. And when you got there, his dad was running at you guys with a machete. And you didn't shoot him, you stopped, but then you guys realized, like, man, these folks, they got nothing else. You know what I mean? There's little kids living here, and I remember you sharing that story, but very reluctantly, right? Which was something that I was like, I internalized it and I was taken back by it. But going back to your history, if you could walk us through, you were there for 35 years, Army Special Forces, which is truly phenomenal. How many parts of the world, how many active combat zones were you in, and why is it, if you don't mind, do you think that a lot of combat veterans, when they come back, it's not like you're not coming back telling everybody this, you're like, you internalize it, you're honorably serving, but I don't know. I wanted to talk to that about with you because I felt it when we had Jaime, and I don't know if you can talk about it a little bit. And then I felt it with you when you opened up a little bit. And I walked up to you. I was like, Mike, I didn't know that. And he goes, Manny, I shared it today because it was a very important. It was a town at one of our Veterans Affairs events. But Manny, I shared it today because it was part of the event. And then that's when I realized, I go, man, that's the tip of Mike's iceberg. So. I don't know. Talk to us a little bit about that because I felt, we and that's when I realized we got to do more. Our country needs to do more for combat veterans, right? But talk to us about that a little bit and your perspective, and when you've come back and now being a civilian, and just I don't know, if shed some light on that, because I could tell you I now have between speaking to you, Jaime Gutierrez, and many other combat veterans, I have a very different perspective in my admiration to you guys has always been high, but now it's like beyond high. I'm like, man, these are angels on earth. I mean, these are special human beings.
Well, thank you for saying that. I think, we represent, America, a broad swath of America. So any one of us in similar circumstances would do the same things. So I don't think, it's not unique to us as individuals. We represent the larger community, the citizenry of the United States. And, why don't combat veterans talk about it? I was in Panama when we went after Noriega. We hadn't been doing much up until that time. I was in South America when at the height of our efforts with the drug war. I went to Afghanistan, and I think why don't people talk about it more? And what I don't like, I've seen guys sometimes, and they get put on the spot. They're not really sure how they're supposed to act. Because if you've seen people killed, or you've seen had to deal with death, or you've had to kill somebody, or you haven't killed anybody and you've been next to, whatever the scenario is, I think it's reserved, what kind of, that spot, everything that brought you to that spot kind of stays in that spot, I think is what it is. And the people that you're with, whether it's, somebody that died, you certainly don't want to recount that story. Now, if you had to kill somebody, that's not something that is necessarily proud of. I mean, a human life is so valuable. I think, most of us would agree with that. And seeing death, I feel blessed in one regard because I know a lot of service members suffer from PTSD. And some of their reluctance might be related to, post-traumatic stress disorder. I never had that, and I was surprised because over a 35-year career, when I was doing my physical to get out, and they were asking me a number of questions. Have you seen this? Did you do this? And I was answering, and then they gave me a very in-depth interview, trying to pull apart. And I said, I don't dream about these things. I don't, I said. And I think it was the sense of control that we had, and perhaps with our training, maybe it wasn't unique to me as an individual. I don't consider myself to be any more resilient than the person next to me, but I think with training, so that we felt like our destiny was in our hands. We felt that, whatever happened, we could get through it. And if the guys that didn't get through it, well, they went, down thinking we're going to get through it. So, and then the guys that, got through it said, see, I told you, I knew we could get through it. So there's almost this sense that, we could take on, whatever it was, we were going to get through it. And somehow to retell the story later, it almost cheapens the experience. It almost seems like, unless perhaps you're, gifted and you're telling a story in book form or on film, otherwise, just keeping it to yourself. And one of the things that I don't like is there unfortunately are people that suffer from PTSD. And I don't know what the numbers are. Certainly, I remember we had a service member who'd been a detective in Washington, D.C. before he joined the military. And he never adjusted to the military, ended up, being put out, relatively early. But he was a homicide detective for 11 years in Washington, D.C., and he said he had visions of, the horrible things going into the projects, going into tenement buildings, seeing, babies, young people shot, killed, overdose, people burned, stabbed. He said, those images kind of stuck in his, because there was nothing he could do about it. I think, so they just haunted him all the time. He wanted to solve it, but he couldn't. Every day he was there after the fact trying to, make sense of it. Whereas we, I think, we're kind of more the captains of our own fate. And so, when we saw things, we were obligated to react, not try and figure out, go through a long investigative process. So I think a good number of military members serve and they don't have PTSD, and they're not suicidal. And that's not to take anything away from the people that do have it, because it's a real entity and people do suffer from it. But not everybody. It's a small percentage. So we want to remember those, and we want to provide them with the services They were serving their country. They didn't ask for it necessarily. But for the rest of us, not every veteran you meet is, suicidal PTSD guy, to be honest. And so, I object sometimes when they say, hey, remember the vets, PTSD, almost to say that every veteran has PTSD. That's not true. All my friends that have 35 years military, and I think I know one guy that has PTSD out of, the hundreds of people that I've met. So it's real, and that's not to diminish, what that person is suffering from. And we do need to recognize it as an entity, but by and large, overwhelmingly, veterans are, your neighbors. They're serving different capacities, and they're not going to sleep at night thinking about the horrible things they went through. Speaking for myself and my friends, I can say that.
No, and that's powerful, because I think it teaches, especially all the folks watching this, not to, like I remember having Jaime, we were talking about it, and there was a student that immediately said, oh, did you see people? And I was like, wait a second. You shouldn't, you know what I mean? Don't ask that. You know what I mean? If an individual, if a combat veteran wants to open up on his own, like you did with that day with that story, that's a different story. But I think that's, your words are powerful, because I think people need to be more empathetic, right? It's not like, hey, it's, you hit it on the head. You hit it on the head. So I appreciate you sharing that. Before I hand it over to Albert and Brent, so you were Manuel Noriega, right? You were was it the drug war in South
South America was the drug war. We started in some of the kind of where they made the coca leaf, the coca paste that was then transported, and then we hopped from that country. We were there for 2 iterations of 6 months each, where I was saying earlier that, I went there as a young guy thinking that these are the bad guys, we're going to get them. I had all this training now. I had a Green Beret, we're going to get these guys. We talked about, when we get these guys. And I found, as, you mentioned with the story with the campesino, the simple farmer with defending his young boy against a group of men with machine guns, and he had a machete. And he came running at us. He wasn't going to stop. And, I thought, he was, 2 steps away from being cut down, because, obviously we're not going to let him get in there and say, well, we feel bad for him. We're going to let him chop us up in little pieces. No. So we're like, hey, it's better, hey. But he was just so, focused on protecting his child that he didn't, it didn't dawn on him that he was facing overwhelming odds. And so it was a bit of a revelation to see how poor people were. And, we were told that they were the bad guys and we were the good guys. But even back then, they would ask, well, what about the consumidor? What about the gente en los Estados Unidos quien está comprando la droga? How is that nuestra culpa? How is that our fault? You guys are buying it. We're growing it and selling it. If you want to stop the drug problem, stop using it, and we'll stop selling it.
That's true.
Yeah. And I said, well, that's what kind of logic is that? But really, they kind of hit something there. And then I remember we were visited because we were one of the first teams in. So kind of got the process going, and it built up, and expanded. Then we brought in military. Then they had shotguns and these old rifles. But then they, to complement what we had, the bad guys got more sophisticated. Then we got more sophisticated, and kind of went back and forth. But which made me lose my train of thought with regard to what was I going to say?
The different. You were in Afghanistan. You were in Panama. You were in South and Central America. Just talking about the different areas that you were in during your service. And I think, by the way, going back to your point on the drug war, correct me if I'm wrong, but Afghanistan, one of their top crops was
the poppy, the heroin.
And who was growing
opium,
it? The Taliban. And who was, no, it's terrible. But we were talking about the different. Manuel Noriega in Panama, South of Central America for the drug. Anything in the Caribbean, or anything that could be disclosed or can't, or you know what I mean? In that effect.
Well, I've been to all the. I went to a number of countries. I was in Haiti following the earthquake, A few days after the earthquake, I went with a small team. At that time, I was stationed here in Doral at U.S. Southern Command, and we sent a team there.
But at that point, you were working more on the medical side.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
That you were the chief of staff.
Yeah, I was in the Surgeon General's office.
Surgeon General.
Yeah. And we went to Haiti with the expectation, kind of like they're talking about now, where the prisons have been emptied, the guns from the police department have been taken by the bad guys. We knew about the HIV rate, which is, unfortunately the highest in the Western Hemisphere. So we, went into Haiti, and I was assigned a job that had me with a Haitian driver, two drivers, one for the day and one for the night. I just stayed out 24 hours just driving. We'd sleep in the truck. We would go, and we were, really trying to move injured around. And there was a huge response from the international community, which, these are the stories that I don't mind telling. There was a huge response. It was part of the rescue. People were digging into the rubble to pull people out, the earthquake victims. And people came from everywhere. All kinds of non-governmental organizations, NGOs were represented, as well as governments. Russia was there, Canada, Israel, Spain. There's a number of people that sent people to help. And it was amazing. We were all out on this big airfield, the flags from different countries, different campsites. People would get up, hey, how was it? Share things. But by the end, I was there for 3-4 months. By the end, because somebody stole something, and then somebody walked through somebody's camp. So then they put up, a couple of boxes, and then they put up a couple of more things. And pretty soon, people had their little places, with guards sectioned off. But in the beginning, it was just, hey, we're all in this together, humanity. Let's try and help people. But it didn't take very long for it to evolve into, what we see, generally speaking. So the good-naturedness was lost, the helpful hand, and we went back to parochialism and, kind of keeping our own, protecting our own little rice bowl. And, this is mine. It was just, it's funny.
And I think from that, and a lot of folks don't, maybe to this day, people might see it in the news, but it doesn't get told enough. We're the most humanitarian country in the world, right? We have, and I correct me if I'm wrong, but our armed forces helps out more people around the world than anyone else combined, in my opinion. I don't know.
I want to say something that I didn't finish the point because I got off, talking about how it was so beautiful to see how everybody was working together initially, and then how, unfortunately, our societal norms crept back in. But what I wanted to highlight was the graciousness of the Haitian people. I went there with these preconceived notions, which, much like I did years earlier in all these places that I've been to, I had some sense. I didn't go in there a blank slate. I went in there with some idea of what I was going to be doing, who I was facing, who we were facing. And when I went into Haiti, I said, this is, society has crumbled, the infrastructure is gone, it's bands, roving bands. But I found, and I think most of us that worked that particular mission found that as poor as they were, with that, and death surrounding them, and I'll tell you this story. Do I have time for a quick story?
Of course,
yeah. And it really moved me. And these are the kind of stories that, when people say, hey, tell a story. I was going from hospital to hospital, and many of the hospitals had suffered infrastructure damage where the roofs have caved in, killed, patients. The CT scan or MRI, whatever it was they had, they've lost their capability because they were crushed. And so part of my job then was to go around and find out which places, going to the visiting countries, the Russians, the Israelis, what do you have? Who can you, Doctors Without Borders, they were there, or Médecins Sans Frontières, So they, go there, say, can you take patients? They have a bunch of people over here. And then we were sending people out to the hospital ship. You might remember the hospital ship was there as well. So, I just kind of visiting these different places to get an idea of how many they had, what their capacity was, could we send people, et cetera. And as we pulled up to this one hospital there in Haiti. Most of it was outside now under a tent, being staffed by NGOs, volunteer physicians and nurses from other places. University of Miami was very involved, and Dr. Barth Green in a program called MediShare was instrumental in aid to Haiti. I think the director at that time was Shalala, But as we pulled into this hospital and I walked across, I was in my military uniform, and, speaking of not showering, it had been, a week, 10 days since we had showered. So, kind of, this dusty, and I had a sidearm, that was it. Which of course caused some angst in the beginning, because I said, oh my goodness, these guys are going to pull me out. What am I going to do with a pistol, But as I went across this courtyard into the area of the hospital that still had some capacity that was functioning, I heard behind me, vroom, 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 and I said, oh, I didn't, I kind of just looked over, and I just kept walking because I was kind of trying to identify who it was that I needed to talk to, and then I heard vroom, vroom, vroom. And, I looked, and there was a little Haitian girl that had an amputation from, had an amputation from the knee down. And she was being pushed by a girl in a school uniform that, and they were, rushing, and it looked like at me, but I thought, so I kind of, look, and I heard them, and then I looked, and I said, oh, wow, they look like they're coming closer to me. I said, I don't want to get this wrong, but, it looks like if I don't move, they might hit me. So I kind of ran out of the way, and I jumped up on this little curb, and they came by me, and they were laughing. And I said, oh, my goodness, they were trying to hit me. And, and so I said, oh, and as they, went by, they were both laughing. And I said, oh, wow, I wonder, this little girl, look, obviously she had been one of the many people that had suffered, an amputation as a result of the earthquake. And so I asked, whoever it was that I met with, director, and I said, hey, what? And they said, oh, we're trying to, reunite her with family members. And I said, oh, what happened? They said, her school was the one that, the building collapsed and crushed, most of her classmates. And they said, and the little girl that was with her stayed home that particular day. And this girl, the only way we could, save her, but, she lost her brother, and, we had to amputate her leg. And I said, well, why is she here? Wasn't, with her family? She said, oh, well, she lost her family too. And I said, what? And he said, oh, we're waiting for, some relatives that, live in a different part of the country to come and collect her. And I thought to myself at the time, Manny, I thought, wow, here's a little girl that just suffered catastrophic loss. She lives in this country that I didn't even want to come to. And yet somehow, minus a leg, minus her family, she's able to laugh, And it made me think, and I think we all thought that way. We said, what do we have to complain about? If these people can be so gracious and look at, the positive in life, how is it that we can find things to complain about? The milk is too expensive, the line is too long, the air conditioning is not cold enough. I said, and those are the stories that have helped. I think not the ones that the unfortunate incidences that have happened along the way to people. That's the stories that really stick in my mind are those kinds of stories, the ones that I see the dignity of human beings, and I see the theme that kind of connects all of us, working with people in these other countries. And I think I can say that we were in Bolivia for a time, and there was an uprising where we were trying to eradicate the coca leaf, which was seen for a long time as a traditional, and they could grow it and make some money. And, the U.S. government was going to offer incentives to the Bolivian government, which was, they had some mines that had closed, so there was this huge unemployment problem, and people moved to this region and were growing leaves. It's the only way they could make, some money. And so we, worked with these 200-300 people, and some of them I became close with. I was there for several months. Young guy, we were living under the same conditions. We didn't have electricity. We had gas. We had latrines that we dug, slit trenches and whatever. And when there was this uprising, the U.S. government didn't want to get involved, much like happened in some of the other countries, where you might remember in Colombia there was a plane that was shot down, and there was 5 passengers on board that were picked up by the FARC, and 2 were executed. One was an American, one was a Colombian, and they took 3 Northrop Grumman contractors that were working for the government as captives. And they ended up being hostages to the FARC for 5 years. And you might remember they were the ones that were rescued when the Colombians dressed up as Red Cross, and they saved those guys as well as several other people who had been held by the FARC for Ingrid Betancourt was a candidate at the time. But we work with these people in these settings, and we were positioned to go in very early and try and affect the outcome in Colombia when these guys were first grabbed, much like in some of these other places. But because the U.S. government doesn't want to involve U.S. troops and escalate things, because now a U.S. troop is on the ground, it's a military action, heaven forbid a U.S. military member gets killed, now that elevates everything. And so in a lot of these cases, we end up walking away. And it's really, it goes against everything, it's almost like you have a building on fire and there's people yelling for help and they say, no, come on, let's go. It's tough. Those are the things that you say, if you're going to have a sleepless night, that would be a sleepless night, just because, you can't affect the change and you're being told, don't do what you're inclined to do.
That's tough because sometimes Washington, right? All the geopolitical wrangling and issues. You're like, oh, this is the right thing to do. Like, no, there's these moving parts that that are so.
And it's very real, and it's it's unfortunate, from the ground level. You say no. But obviously, everybody has a boss, and we don't decide for ourselves. We're not mercenaries. So they tell us we go, whether we want to go or not. And they say stay home, we stay home. Yeah.
Listen, it happened to my community, and unfortunately, Brothers to the Rescue. Right, you had Cuban communists, the Castro regime, take out U.S. citizens, right, flying on humanitarian causes in the Cuban Straits, shoot them down. And Clinton administration was everybody was ready to bombard all the air bases in Cuba. Somebody within the State Department said, no, it's not in our years later, they find out that there was a Cuban spy, Ana Benemontes, who she possibly had, it seems like a hand in all of that at that time, So, no, you're right. There's a lot of moving parts that don't make sense, right? It's terrible. It's terrible. It really is terrible. The right thing would have been similar to your situation back then. Hey, take out the air bases. Send the message. You cannot touch American citizens. But yeah, it was. But years later, they ended up finding a Cuban spy in the State Department.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Terrible. Yeah, I know. Terrible. Who had a role in all of that? It's terrible. I'm gonna hand it over to Brent and Albert. They have a couple questions lined up for you.
Okay.
All right. So, when in the military, do you often get the feeling that you're being watched or observed?
No, I don't think so. I was very conscientious during my time in the military. I stayed off of social media. I didn't have Facebook. I didn't, only because, the places that we were going, we just didn't want to have a thread that would come back to us. Early on as part of our training, they made sure that we removed all our tags out of, even a laundry tag that, could somehow be able to be traced back to, So I didn't feel that we were being watched necessarily, but we did take precautions to make sure that we didn't put ourselves in a position that could compromise us down the road.
I never thought about that. The tag that's on yours. You're right, because if you're in a certain country, somebody's like, wait a second, made in Hialeah, Florida, like, or made, you know what I mean, whatever. What is this doing here? You know, and that can stop. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
So, during your 35-year career, who was someone that you really looked up to, and that if you could tell them, something right now, what would you tell them?
Gosh, there was a few people that I really had a tremendous degree of respect for. I think there was when I was on a Special Forces A team, that's what we called them, and my team leader was a Captain Jay Glover, and he was a man of tremendous integrity. He was one. There was a 3-star general by the name of Charles Cleveland, who was another team leader of mine back when he was a young guy as a captain. And let me see. Those are the two names that come to the forefront. And I think what I appreciated about them the most was their integrity. When we're out in the middle of nowhere, when we could cut corners, when we could, they were always true to themselves and to us. I remember I was working with, we were going after the guys making the coca paste. It was not the refined cocaine that was developed further down the road, but the paste. And I was having tremendous success. I was put to a camp with another guy. He got pulled out early, so I was there by myself. And my numbers for seizures was astronomical. And he said, "Hey, wow, how are you doing this?" And what I was doing was people were coming in, informants were telling me where the stuff was. And then when I would go get them, they'd say, "Hey, you go get 100 keys of the product. If you could, give me 5-10 keys, then we'll call it even." I said, "No, I get 90 keys out of the jungle, and I'm giving this guy 10, which I would be out 100." But I said, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea." So being the young dumb guy, so this guy, the Captain Glover, he said, "What are you doing? You can't do that." He said, "That's making you a drug dealer." I said, "I'm not." I said, I'm taking the product off the street." And he said, No. We that's not. And I said, "Yeah, but our numbers." He said, "I don't care about the numbers. We're not doing that." And I said, "Oh." And of course, I was out there by myself. If I was not of the same moral, ethical, fiber, I would have said, whatever. But I said, I didn't see the rationale of what he was saying at the time, but I said, "Yeah, this is a guy that he's an officer. He's telling me what to do." At that time, I was a sergeant, but more than that, I respected him, and I respected his stance that do the right thing even when somebody's not looking. So
that's awesome. You guys got anything else? Hey, so we hand it over to you. You get to ask 2 questions of me, of us, anything you want. So you're the
okay.
You're the host for. We give you two opportunities.
Oh, okay. All right, that sounds good. One of my, as a young guy, I grew up, I went to, we tried to go to Bobby Kennedy's funeral in 1968, but we drove up, my father drove us there. We lived 45 minutes. We lived on Long Island at the time, and the lines were wrapped around the, blocks, and people were passing out. And the first time I saw fire hydrants, the fire department had opened them up for, the young kids because everybody was so hot. But I was always a fan of John F. Kennedy, and he famously said in his inaugural address, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what can you do for your country?" So having said that, you have been a public servant for quite some time, giving back to the community. If there was one thing that you could change, if you were given the power to do one thing in your role as the mayor of Miami Lakes, without having to go through approval processes, and what do you have one thing that you would that comes to mind that if this is a one thing I could do, this is this is the change I would like to affect. This is the impact I would like to make. And I understand you're running for mayor of Dade County. So maybe this is foreboding and foreshadowing. You tell us what you can change, and you'll be able to do it. But in the meantime, what is it that you would do here in the town of Miami Lakes?
So that's actually a very deep and good question. What we've done the last 12 years, I wouldn't change anything, because every door that seemed difficult always led to something else that in hindsight I was like, all right, that's why it happened. But if I were to look at the town's future and change one thing, I would have a bit more balance between the mayor and the council in terms of accountability, right? So we have a process today, not only in Miami Lakes, but I think throughout the country, where you have way too many unelected bureaucrats, right, that have an immense amount of power over people's lives. So obviously I'm leaving in November, and I'm not going to have an opportunity to change this, and I don't even know if a council would ever vote to change this, or if it'll ever go out to a vote. But I would tell you, a bit more balance, maybe a bit more executive powers to the mayor, a bit more sharing of powers with the council. I think we've given not only Miami Lakes, but I think way too many cities throughout our country have gone away from what our founders foresaw and have created a different group. Sometimes you could even categorize it as special interest outside of what our residents want, because our residents think that when they elect us, that we're the ones that make the decisions. And a lot of times you have these bureaucrats that are yielded power, not by the people, not by even the majority of the people, but not even by the entire councils in all these cities, but a majority of the council. A majority of the council can literally yield the power or the authority that the people have given to them and yield it to an unelected bureaucracy, where sometimes doesn't have the interest of the people. And I think that might be the one thing I would like to see, not only change here, but throughout cities in our country. Because I think, look, there's a role for professionals in the bureaucratic, in government, right? But I think there has to be more accountability, which hence why I'm running for mayor of the county. It's an executive position. I don't think I'll ever, maybe besides Congress or governors, but besides Congress, I don't think I'll ever run for a legislative position again, because I've gotten to the point where I know more than some of the unelected bureaucrats, and it becomes very difficult for me, because I'm like, man, this is the right thing to do. Yet it's not being done because the accountability given from our residents, right? Well, a lot of times 14,000, 15,000 vote to our council, not even the entire council, just a small majority of the council gets yielded to unelected people that sometimes don't have the interest of our residents at first. So I would change the balance of powers within cities if I had, but that's why I'm running, and it delves into that, but that's why I'm running for an executive position where I'm going to be able to get there and effectuate change immediately. I've been able to do it in Miami Lakes because of, and this is DJEFN uses, because of polite persistence, right? So since the day I got elected to now, I'm the only member of the dais in the history of the council. Every single meeting I have 3 items for discussion, no matter what. It could be something as mundane as I want to put an orchid on a tree, but I realized that was the only way to effectuate change in a legislative position that unfortunately the majority of the council yields powers to unelected bureaucrats, was to push the envelope on the idea making process. But that takes a lot of energy, right? So that's why you have members of the dais today who have never put anything on the agenda and have yielded complete authority to unelected bureaucrats, which creates a really bad taste in our residents' mouth, because they believe that we are the ones that are supposed to be accountable to them. And I think that's why the residents of the county back then voted to create executive powers for the mayor. I think that's why, You've seen the governor throughout the year, especially Jeb Bush was one of the most transformative governors in Florida, and you saw him eliminate the education commissioner from being elected statewide, a bunch of different positions to being appointed by the governor. But I think that's why what residents want is accountability. But that's maybe everything else is a journey that's led me to where I'm at today. But the one thing that I would like to see, not only Miami Lakes, but cities throughout our country, is on the accountability side, because I think it's created a group of people that have been empowered that sometimes don't have the interest of our residents, and it becomes almost a special interest group. So now you not only have your residents that you're supposed to be serving, now you have, if you have a 7-member, 5-member council, you need 3 that can yield all the power to an elected bureaucrats that might say, hey, you know what, this is what we want to do aside from what residents want to do. And then you have the lobbies. I mean, and it creates a very convoluted process. But yeah, maybe that's the one thing in Miami Lake's future, but the future of every city throughout our country, I think, has to have a better balance of accountability. And I think I'm leaving in November, and I hope future council members keep things or question things enough, but I just don't see enough of that, right? I see a lot of good people who want to get elected, but once they get elected, they're just happy to be there, and they yield all the accountability to unelected folks who a lot of times, unfortunately, don't have the interests of the residents first, right? Now you're creating another interest group internally. But maybe that's the one thing in the town's future. But overall, nothing that's happened in the last 12 years would I change, because I think God puts certain challenges and bumps in the roads that now in hindsight I look back, I'm like, man, that's why it happened. God prepares you for stuff. So I hope I answered that as well as possible.
Yeah, no, I find that curious only because our governor, Ron DeSantis, of course, is known for wielding a big stick, and he's very authoritative, and he's been able to shape the government, largely in the direction that he wants to, for the reasons you mentioned. And he's got the support of the people. People want that too, so they vote him in, and he's got a large appeal. And how is it that we got to this point then where we feel that we've made concessions and you don't have the authorities? Is it in the charter? Is it something that you could simply put on the agenda and vote as a council, or would it have to go to the electorate and the town would have to vote on it? Because you're right, I'm sorry not to cut you off, but you're right. I see on the different groups, people are throwing all kinds of hate at the elected officials and you guys, and I think to myself, I don't think they have the ability to affect this change that you want, yet that the impression is that you do. So how would you be able to bring that back to a more where the mayor or the elected officials perhaps had more say?
So you would need it, and again, in Miami-Dade County, there's only 4 cities with an executive form of government where there's direct accountability to the people. It's Hialeah. If things go wrong in Hialeah, there's one guy. I mean, you obviously have the legislative branch, which is the council, but you got one guy to blame, which is Mayor Bobo. If things go well as well, right? He gets rewarded with winning re-election. Hialeah Gardens, Sweetwater, and Medley, right? You really only have 4 cities that have major accountability, right? So if a city, and not only Miami Lakes, but if a city were to change this, it would have to go to a vote of the majority of the council, and then it will have to go to a vote of the majority of our residents. In most cases, so what ends up happening, Mike, is that I've seen throughout Dade County and Florida, city councils become so comfortable with passing the buck in terms of accountability that sometimes they don't want to be accountable. The mayor doesn't want to be accountable, right? Because now you can blame things go wrong, which is wrong. Our residents don't want that. But all you need is a vote of a majority of the council and a majority of our residents. What happens is personalities come into play. So I think the city of Miami recently tried to do it. The residents voted no. They didn't. And sometimes it's more of a reflection of whoever is in that position. Look, like if it were to go up to a vote here in Miami Lakes, most people, my approval rating, and I hate always saying this, is really high compared to most mayors, even the governor, most mayors throughout the country. Because I've gotten to meet folks, right?
I've seen you at every possible. Yeah. I don't know how you make time,
It's
but
tough.
I've seen you at everything.
Yeah. So, and I do that locally, right? So I try. My schedule really revolves around the town. Everything else I don't go to right outside of the town because it's a little different the way that I'm doing things, but yeah, that would be the process. You would have a majority of the council has to vote for it, and then a majority of the residents. But you're right, Mike. Most of the folks believe that when they elect somebody, that person is going to be held accountable. And what happens is most people, and it's happened here, where most people immediately yield, not because only the charter, just because it's convenient to unelected bureaucrats. And what happens is you create a process where there's no accountability and everybody's blaming each other. Nobody wants to do anything. And that's where you see stagnation happen. And look, once in a while, you might get lucky and you might have an incredible group of bureaucrats, of public servants that are doing administration, they're doing a great job. But more than likely what you get are folks who are so used to hey, this is the way things are done. This is the way things happen. This is the way that you never see. It's really hard to make change. Hence why I use every meeting, the 3 opportunities that I'm given by our rules to effectuate change. And I've done it for 12 years. The only member literally you have people that have served for 8 years and have never proposed anything. Every single council meeting, I'm trying to effectuate change one way or the other. Look, I had Gigi's Playhouse here last week and she brought up a good idea. She goes, Manny, I would love to create a program with the town of Miami Lakes where we would have adults with Down syndrome be greeters or do a lot of the reception work. I'm going to put, and I go, you know what, that's a great idea. I'm going to put it on the agenda. I'm going to put it on the agenda to create an MOU between us and Gigi's Playhouse to create a process and that's how, the only way to do it. If I were to approach the bureaucratic process, that doesn't work. And nobody wants to do it because but yeah, and I'm sorry to, but yeah, it's the unfortunate side of local government, but hence why I'm pivoting and I'm running for an executive position. For me, it'll be really hard. Like I've had people tell me, hey, why don't you run for school? Why don't you run for state representative? I'm like, listen, I don't want to be the guy trying to effectuate change continuously from the outset and have to be in positions where I have to wait 10 years to gain enough power where I can pass one thing. I don't know. I'm in a thought process now where I think we can effectuate change immediately. So.
And then I assume on the bureaucracy holds some professional expertise, so there might be some things that the elected official might not be aware of, but it would be probably good if it was a symbiotic relationship where the two coexisted, kind of dependent on one another, rather than just having, the balance of power shifted to one side or the other.
Well, I could tell you, if you elect a mayor or a council who has some governmental experience, but is a CEO of an organization, for example, owns some, that person, like we had Carlos Alvarez. Carlos Alvarez was in one of our best council members. Some people criticize, oh, he didn't come to enough meetings, he missed this. He ran an organization where he was held accountable. There was no school district. He opened up a school on his own. He created it from scratch. And now it's one of the top schools in the country. He opened up, and what it took the town's bureaucracy to put 2 crosswalks in, he built 2 schools, one in Nevada and one Colorado. And he got approvals in Iowa, South Carolina, Arkansas, Idaho, all these states throughout the nation, while we were stuck spinning our wheels for 2 years trying to put in crosswalks, right? And part of he ended up resigning, and same thing with Jeff Rodriguez, right? Very talented people, but once they got in, they were like, this is insanity. I mean, it becomes challenging for people that want to get things done in an ethical, right way. It becomes frustrating. I'm an optimist, so I always try to keep pushing. I'm a happy warrior, but it does become burdened. Like Jeff Rodriguez could have won re-election unopposed, and he walked away. Carlos Alvarez, if he wanted to run for mayor in November, he would have won by 20 points. He walked away as well. He was like, I don't, Manny, I'm already I got a bigger staff than the town. I got a bigger budget than the town. I'm effectuating change on a national level. I'm out of here, and it becomes a challenge to retain talent. Forget about on the administrative side, but on the council side, it really becomes challenging to find talent. And what you end up getting is, mediocre folks. I mean, let's just be real. That's what ends up happening. You get folks who maybe you run in the future. So you should.
The mediocre people.
No.
Wait a minute.
No. What I'm saying is, all we get is mediocre folks. So maybe that's why we need good people to run. Talented folks to run.
I have the pleasure of meeting some of the your colleagues, and I think by and large they all have the same goal in mind, which is to make the town a better place, and certainly nobody takes us on for the pay. No. I think they all have good intentions, but like you said, perhaps they all get worn down a little bit just because it's a bureaucracy, and it's not unique to Miami Lakes. I think that's the process that we're obligated to follow, unless we could make some legislative changes.
Then you would see things happen a lot faster, right? But Mike, what was your title when you retired? What was that last rank when you retired?
I was a lieutenant colonel, U.S. Army lieutenant colonel. I started as a private. I went up the ranks on the sergeant side, and with 15 years in, 14 years, I went to OCS, Officer Candidate School, and then started over from the bottom of the officer ranks, second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, major, and finished as a lieutenant colonel. So I think I was probably one of the oldest second lieutenants, and it was after 15 years in the military, and now I was starting at the bottom as an officer. It was a little rough there for a couple of years.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, in closing, Mike, if you're looking in that camera and share some words of inspiration, motivation to that next Michael Coote, right? There's, I'm sure, hundreds of kids in our country who don't know what's going to be their path in the future. And are undecided, are like, hey, do I go in the military? Maybe in the same thing, hey, I'm just going to go for 3 years. I'm going to add another 3 years. You know what? You made an amazing career out of it. You served our country honorably. I mean, it is very humbling to be in the presence of somebody who served at that level. So if you can share, in closing, some words of inspiration, motivation, just kind of looking back throughout all the years from lieutenant colonel to that kid who was undecided as to what his future was going to be. So if you could share that in closing.
Of course. So one of the adages that I lived by in the military, and it took me a little bit before I realized the importance, but the adage is lead, follow, or get out of the way. And so I think if you're going to endeavor to do anything, then look to lead. And if you don't feel comfortable leading, that's okay. Not everybody's a leader. You can follow until such time as you're willing to lead. But if you're not going to lead, nor are you going to be a follower, then you're just hampering the process. And regardless of the endeavor, the enterprise, if you're not leading and you're not following, then please, for the rest of us that are willing to lead and follow, just get out of the way. It makes things a lot easier. I think that would be it.
And there you have it. A real American hero.
Yeah.
Incredible story. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Coote. Tune in next Wednesday on Instagram, Facebook, and X.